You know, the thing about the fifth act of Macbeth is that by the time we reach it, we're ready to see him die. We're ready to see him experience all the pain and suffering that he has caused other people. And quite frankly, we want justice for all of these horrendous crimes that he's committed. So while you look at Act 5 and you go, oh my gosh, it's got 9 scenes, it is so fast. So fast. If you read it, every single line, it would take you less than 20 minutes to get through it all. We've already seen the demise of Lady Macbeth and her, descent into madness, this very stark contrast from the rather powerful and controlling woman that we saw at the beginning of the play. We switch immediately from that scene to this introduction. If you turn the page, and I am using this edition, okay, I'll reference page or line numbers as well. But if you turn the page onto page 86 into scene 2, all of a sudden you're like, who are these new characters? What's happening? You don't need to know any of their names. They're not important. For some reason, Shakespeare introduces them all here at the very end, probably to please King James. They were, historical figures of record. But here's what is important. So in scene 2, go up to the top of page 87. And start looking right at line 11. There's this great line that says, how does the tyrant? We're beginning to hear how people in Scotland are now feeling towards Macbeth. So I want you to read from line 11 to line 22. You're going to pause me right now. And I want you to mark 5 phrases that tell us how people are feeling towards Macbeth. And you should probably actually find more than 5. So pause me and do that and then come back. So you now know people are beginning to understand everything that Macbeth has done. They are realizing, connecting the dots between Macbeth's presence and all of the murders that have happened. They call him a tyrant. They talk about how the giant's robes are on a dwarfish frame. He's not fit to wear this mantle of king. We're not necessarily surprised by this. The person who would be surprised by this is Macbeth, and that's evidenced on page 88 as we enter into scene 3. His attitude at the very beginning of this scene is so surprising. He's so arrogant. In fact, he's nothing but arrogant. He says, bring me no reports. Let them fly all. Till Birnam wood come to Dunsinane, I cannot taint with fear. You're like, are you serious? He's put all of his faith and trust into the supernatural. He is clinging to those predictions by the witches at this point. He wants to hear nothing of reality. He doesn't care that everyone is telling him there are hundreds of English troops outside of your door. He's like, but the witches said. And if you look at those first 10 lines, and I'm going to stop you here, and I want you to look at those first 10 lines. I want you to notice all of the times that he is referencing the supernatural. So pause me here, go through those first 10 lines, mark all of those references to the supernatural. And what you found is that Macbeth has fully rejected Christianity. He's placed all of his trust in the witches. And we know that not only does this kind of solidify him as rejection of his faith, but also as a very weak leader. And what does a good leader do? Well, he takes stock of facts, right? He looks at the evidence and he says, okay, there are actually some things happening here I need to pay attention to. A leader that dismisses facts, do we want them in charge of us? No, not really, because they're living in this alternate reality. And Macbeth certainly is here. He's clinging to these witches' predictions. Now, people come in, they say there are 10,000 forces out of your door. And over on page, Macbeth does begin to at least realize that a battle is imminent. And of course, there's always the chance in a battle that he could die. And so at the bottom of page at the top of page 89, right at line 22, he gets this final kind of like burst of self-reflection, right? He says, I have lived long enough. This is the beginning of line 22. I've lived long enough. My way of life has fallen into the sere, the yellow leaf, and all that should accompany old age, such as love, honor, troops of friends, I must not look to have. It's actually very sad. He's thinking back on his life and recognizing that all of those things that we ourselves want when we are older, we want to be surrounded by family, we want to be surrounded by friends, we want to know that our lives mattered, right? That we made a difference, that we can die with integrity. Macbeth realizes that he's given all of that up. And for what? Well, for power. And for power that he's held for a brief amount of time. Macbeth has been king at this point for only a couple of months. And he has nothing to show for it. And that's it's kind of this last moment of sympathy that the audience might have for him as he makes this realization. Towards the end of this scene, the doctor who was attending Lady Macbeth comes on stage and tells Macbeth that she needs more the divine than the physician, that, she must minister to a mind diseased, and Macbeth wants to hear nothing of it. And he, walks away from the doctor and says, I'm going into battle and, fly false thanes, etc. Scene 4 enters. Okay, I told you this is fast. Scene 4 enters, and the only thing you need to know in scene 4 is that Malcolm makes this really interesting statement on page 91, okay, lines 4 through 7. So Malcolm is commanding his troops. Remember, he's been down in England hiding, but he's also been amassing an army to march against Macbeth. He has Macduff on his side, and as they approach Dunsinane, which is where Macbeth is kind of held up, Malcolm gives this instruction beginning in line 4. Let every soldier hew him down a bough and bear it before him. Hence, we shall shadow the numbers of our host to make discovery ere and report of us. Now listen to that instruction really carefully. Malcolm has just said, cut down a tree branch from the forest that we're surrounded by. By the way, they're in Burnham Forest. And carry it in front of you. And then march so that we are camouflaged. So if you looked out the window, would it seem as if the forest were moving towards Dunsinane? Those witches. Tricky, tricky, tricky. We jump back to scene 5 and we're back in Macbeth's castle, and Macbeth is shouting orders and he is telling people to prepare for war, etc. And if you're glancing, you're on page 92, you're glancing, you get this weird stage direction. It says a cry from within of women. And Macbeth kind of stops and he's like, what was that noise? And somebody comes on stage and actually says it was the cry of women. Macbeth goes on, etc. And then Satan, not the Prince of Darkness, but a servant, comes back on and says, the queen, my lord, is dead. And with that one line, Lady Macbeth is eliminated from the play. I've always hated that for her. I feel like she deserved a more dramatic death on stage. But there you have it. She's dead. And of course, she's died by suicide, as was indicated or alluded to back in scene 1. What's really interesting is Macbeth's reaction to this. His reaction is one of almost dismissal and annoyance. She should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. He almost seems like, well, I wish she would have died at another time. I could have mourned her then. I'm too busy now. It's again just a complete shift in their relationship. But then Macbeth makes perhaps one of the most, maybe the most famous speech of this entire play. And it's rather bleak. It's horribly depressing. As I read it, I want you to be marking for 2 things. One, I want you to mark for all of the references to time. Time is not necessarily a motif that we track throughout the entire play because it really only appears in this moment. And then I want you to look for metaphor. He compares life to 2 different things here, and we're going to try to identify them. So Macbeth says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps from this petty pace, from day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking player. A poor shadow, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He has all of these references to time. Time is certainly something that's heavy on his mind right now because he knows his is short. Time stretches on and our lives are just a brief moment in them, right? He makes this great metaphor comparison to life. One, he calls it a candle. Out, out, brief candle. Well, a candle, as brightly as it burns, how easy is it to eliminate, to blow out? You've seen that before, I'm sure. Suddenly a gust of wind comes, the candle blows out, and that's it. Then he also references and says, life's but a poor player. Struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. And a player, of course, is an actor. So he says, we are all just actors on the stage of life. What we do doesn't really matter. It's a horribly bleak, depressing attitude towards life. But does it fit Macbeth's moment here? Of course it does. He recognizes that his life is over. He recognizes that he doesn't really have anything to show for it. It's bleak and depressing, and it probably also reflects a lot of Shakespeare's own attitude towards life. Macbeth's written in 1607. Just a few years earlier, he's experienced the great death of his 10-year-old son, Hamnet. And he's realizing that all that he's worked for throughout his life, the titles and the property and the wealth that he's amassed, he has no one to pass it down to. He's estranged from his wife. His daughters don't speak to him. The titles will revert back to the crown. He has nothing to show and no legacy. So he thinks now to be able to pass down. So it's probably most akin to when Bronte breaks the fourth wall in Jane Eyre and speaks directly to the reader. This is Shakespeare speaking to us. Now, after this moment of depressing discussion, over on page 93, line 30, a servant comes in and begins to talk and says, I have something to report, but I know not how to do it. I looked out the window and I thought I saw a moving grove, and Macbeth loses his mind. He calls him a liar and a slave, and the servant goes on to say, let me endure your wrath if it be so, but I tell you I saw a moving grove. And Macbeth he knows now that he's been deceived by the witches, but he's still not willing to give up. He arms himself, he calls for his troops to exit the castle and begin to fight. You turn over to page 93, scene 6. Why is this a scene? It's 10 lines, probably to stage a little bit of transition on the actual stage. And then we go over to 95, and it's Macbeth once again. I will fight till the very end. Now here's the important part on scene 7. Turn over to page 96, and finally we have Macduff. Macduff, whom we expect a lot from. I mean, his wife and his children were massacred by this man. We kind of want Macduff to seek revenge, and he doesn't disappoint us. And in line 15, he says, tyrant, show thy face. If thou be slain, with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt me still. So he says, if you've been killed by someone else but me, I'll be haunted by my ghost. He wants to be the one to deliver the killing blow. And in scene 8, Macbeth and Macduff come face to face. It's the final showdown. Macduff delivers this fantastic line. It's one of my favorite lines. He says, turn, hellhound, turn. And Macbeth actually says, of all men else, I have avoided thee. I haven't been near you because the witches told me not to be near you. But Macduff, begins to fight with him. And they begin to fight on stage, and their swords are clashing, etc. And then, in line 12, Macbeth makes this statement. He says, I bear a charmed life. The arrogance, right? The absolute arrogance. I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born, still clinging to those witches' predictions. And here comes Macduff. Well, despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb, untimely ripped. Now, I guess in modern telling, that would mean that Macduff's birth most closely resembled a C-section. Either way, it means that Macduff was taken from his mother. She did not technically birth him. Now, just for clarity's sake, C-sections weren't a thing during Shakespeare's time. No woman would have ever survived that. Most likely, Macduff's mother was dying, and they removed the baby to be able to save it. But either way, have the witches' predictions come true once again? That they have. Those witches, they are tricky, tricky, tricky. They continue to fight, and as you turn over to page 98, okay, it's a really interesting moment if you're looking at the stage directions, because they exit fighting, and then they come back on stage. And if you're looking at your stage directions, it's when they come back on stage that Macduff kills Macbeth. And if you're really confused by those stage directions, it's probably for a very practical reason. They exit the stage so that the actor who's playing Macbeth could put on some sort of costuming, would have had some fake blood packets in it, so that when Macduff kills him, we could have had all the gore and the gross, bloody death that we want Macbeth to have. And then, of course, he takes his body off stage. Now, Duncan wasn't killed on stage. We talked about that, the respect that was given a king's death. But Macbeth is killed on stage. And of course, King James would have been very pleased with that. Here's Macbeth, a rebel, a usurper to the throne. He would have wanted his death to be seen on stage. And as you see then on page 99, Malcolm enters the castle. And once again, with the rightful king on the throne of Scotland, the universe is restored to order. And thus ends the tragedy of Macbeth.